Okay, a very good morning to all our dear viewers and listeners. Once again, you're welcome to our weekly talk show, ACFIM Talks. We've been doing this for the last coming to 4 months now, consistent. Every Friday, same time, we are here discussing nothing other than the topical issues that are mainly happening in our country, but we limit ourselves to things concerning money in politics. You can't talk about money in politics and you don't talk about the economy in itself. So today we are discussing and we are analyzing Uganda's economy, especially in the aftermath of the 2021 elections. With me in the studios, I have two individuals that I'm going to be introducing in a short while, but yours truly, I remain Felix Kafuma, your moderator again. And as usual, allow me to start before I introduce my guests. I first want to encourage each one of you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is ACFIM, so that you get the live updates on and how, especially when we'll be running these continuously. So please take some time, hit the tab, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is ACFIM. All right. In the studios, I have a lady and a gentleman. Both of them have a legal background, so I'm the only unlearned friend that said, but I'll catch up. Let me start with the lady. Since we are in a month where we are celebrating women, she's called Christine Byiringiro. I hope I get your names right, especially. She's the program manager under the Policy and Analysis Governance Program. She's working with Uganda Debt Network, UDN, one of those organizations that has a deep history in monitoring our debt, Uganda's debt. And I think part of its history is rooted in the way the Uganda's debt at some point was running out of hand, and they came up to advocate for a clean start. And I think we shall be having a discussion in that direction. So she has a Bachelor's of Law degree, and she's passionate about uplifting the plight of the poor and the marginalized to ensure that they realize their rights. She's passionate about supporting the poor people in the development agenda, and she's been in this business for the last 9 years. I think we have the right person to discuss issues concerning the economy of Uganda. Then, our other colleague who has joined us in the studio is a gentleman, also with a legal background. Goes by the names Katabazi Patrick. Is it so? Am I right?
Yes, it is.
Yes. He's an economist, but he's also a lawyer, and with a wealth of 16 professional experience in the areas of fiscal planning and analysis, public finance management, policy and legal reforms. He has done a lot of work around national budget analysis. I think I first met Katabazi when he was still working with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. At some point, we did some work together. Again, we were trying to understand the budget of Uganda as we were running towards the 2016 elections. So I'm very sure that we have the right person on the set. He has worked with the Parliamentary Budget Office for 8 years. He's an alumnus for International Monetary Fund Institute for Financial Programming and Policies. He's also the leading expert and advocate for expanding fiscal space for social protection in Uganda. And he has garnered a lot of experience trying to advise Parliament on social development sector. He has also undertaken a number of consultancies and coordinating a number of projects that involve government and development partners in the same direction. I think he's currently spearheading the creation of the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection. And he has also coordinated the consultancy services on behalf of Cambridge Resources International as the national local representative for the development of national parameters in support for projects appraisal in public and private partnerships together with the Ministry of Finance. So we have wealth of experience to pick from in between Patrick and Christine. But let me first lay the foundation. If you've been following some of the revelations coming out of the Auditor General's report, there are a few things I need to first point out. One, I think the budget for 2020-2021 that has been approved is about slightly over 45 trillion. In 2019 and 2020, the budget projections then, which was approved, was about 40 trillion. Although I think much less was allocated and financed. But the things that are of importance and concern to us are the things that I want to look at in terms of one, the supplementary funding, because there are a number of questions around there. According to the Auditor General's report, no our supplementary budgets, so they end up. I seem to be having a network problem. I think I'm back online. Our borrowing as government, as Uganda, has been growing exponentially at alarming levels. As I speak now, I think where we are at the moment, as of October 2020, our debt stock is standing at 63.35 trillion Uganda shillings. In June 2020, our loan portfolio was standing at 46 trillion. But if I can take you back, I think in 2016, our loan portfolio was standing at 28 trillion. So over the years, it has been growing. From 28 trillion in 2016 to now 63 trillion Uganda shillings, it means that we are not just about to stop borrowing. We just have an insatiable appetite for borrowing. So we have a discussion and conversation around that, and what does that mean to the ordinary Ugandan? Another thing that I think is important for us to talk about and discuss that is of importance as we move along are the issues to do with how our loans, when we are negotiating our loans, how secure is Uganda not find itself in a situation whereby our assets are mortgaged? Because John Pombe Magufuli, I think has given us something to talk about and to reconsider. I may point out that majority of the things we are talking about Tanzania and the developments from the standard gauge railway to revival of Air Tanzania to the new terminal projects he has undertaken, to also to a point of where he has also been able to renegotiate, where he was able to renegotiate the loan agreements with the Chinese and other Western leaders, to a point of also ensuring that he expands education, constructing standard gauge railway. All those things he did, majority of it was done by local financing, without necessarily borrowing. But the arguments have been in the direction where Uganda is qualifying its appetite for borrowing, that we are undertaking a number of development projects that warrant us to continuously borrow. So I think it's important to also discuss in context of how has Tanzania been able to do all that using local resources without necessarily relying so much on borrowing, as opposed to Uganda that seems to be borrowing so much money to undertake all these resources, including financing shortfalls of the budget. So that said, let's dig deep into the conversations and get it started. I've lost Patrick briefly, but I'm going to start with Christine because Christine is still online. So Christine, let's start with the subject and the topic on issues concerning our debt. As I recall clearly, in 2000, there was that Jubilee 2000 Global Advocacy. I think we should be championed. You are familiar with those developments. At that point, we were among the highly indebted countries. And then, so we had a debt relief under the highly indebted poor countries, under one and under the cohort 2. But looks like we are almost back to where we were when that global advocacy took place. That said, why is Uganda, break it down for me and another ordinary person, why is Uganda finding itself in a situation that you addressed 20 years ago?
Thank you very much. Yes, we are finding ourselves in this same situation, if not worse, because of some of the reasons which I'm going to elaborate here. And one is because of the borrowing trends that we have taken over time. Just like you've mentioned, under HIPIC, that was the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, and later the MDRI, the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, Uganda actually achieved 100% debt forgiveness. Yeah. And one of the reasons is because most of the biggest part, actually, our borrowers, our lenders, sorry, were concessional. Yeah, the multilaterals, the World Bank, the IMF, and so that is why we were able to lobby, and the debt was forgiven. But moving forward, we shall see later that because we have taken on more commercial loans from private banks and individuals, it's going to be increasingly harder to convince them to forgive our debt. And what does this increasing debt mean to the ordinary man, to you and me? If we look at the ordinary man, maybe in Kubo down there, this means that you will have to be taxed more to pay this debt that we are accumulating at a high rate. This means the tax will, of course, be on the services and the goods that you procure. It could be on the sugar, on the salt. If you're going to board a taxi, the fare will have increased because of the fuel that has gone up. That is one. But secondly, how will it affect the common man? If this common man is a businessman, you have a small business enterprise, whether medium business enterprise, that means your chances of accessing credit to grow your business will go down. Yeah, because as government borrows, we shall see later that there's going to be an effect on our ability to borrow externally, which will push government to borrow domestically, and which we are seeing. And of course, this crowds out the private sector, because the banks and the lenders within are comfortable lending to government, and usually at high interest rates, because government is desperate for the money. And of course, it is safer to lend to government than to you, Felix, or to me, who will most likely default. So that is how it is going to affect the common man. And of course, this ultimately affects the development, because if I cannot access capital and grow my business, you cannot generate enough taxes from me to be able to pay back. Yes.
Wow, thank you. And this is why I bring in Patrick. Christine is trying to explain how I'm going to be affected by this relentless thirst of government borrowing. First of all, they have argued when they borrow that one, they are trying to finance shortfalls in financing the budget. I think for about 3 or 4 years running straight, revenue tax collection, URIs failed to hit the target. So there are challenges there. But they're also arguing that they need this money to mainly fund these major infrastructure projects like Karuma, Isimba, Entebbe Express Highway, name it. But we've seen Tanzania address these challenges differently. The Auditor General, John Mwanga, in his report, he has actually been very, very disturbed by the way our borrowing is starting to become unsustainable, like those figures, because now it's standing at 63.35 trillion Uganda shillings. I want to understand who are the leading lenders to Uganda that we owe this amount of money, that we should be very scared of, and among the leading lenders, are there those that probably whose terms are more stringent, that if me as Felix, I should be very, very concerned about the future of this country? Because I know also for a fact that when you look at the loan agreements that have been signed by the government of Uganda, you realize that there have been a lot of waiver on the immunity Uganda has in accessing these credits. So what does that mean? I think, Katabazi, are you there? I seem to be losing Katabazi, but I would have, but let me bring you in here.
Yeah. So
okay. Katabazi is back online. Just hold it there. Katabazi, my question still stands, because I was trying to ask the pertinent question. Who are these leading lenders to the country called Uganda that we should be scared of? Are they among those ones who we should really be concerned about? For example, I know in Zambia, China is a problem now. Is Uganda in the same basket?
Yes, most of our loans are with international organization, some called multilateral organizations. But lately, we have started seeing other countries, such as China, lending to Uganda. Then we have, like Christina had already elaborated, companies, private companies, lending to Uganda. Examples of these are commercial banks that are lending Uganda through syndicated loans. I know some people may not have heard of this, might think it is far-fetched, but every time we have had a budget shortfall, government of Uganda has entered into arrangements with various banks in Uganda, for example, Standard Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, who have worked in syndicate with other banks outside Uganda for the purposes of raising money for onward lending to government of Uganda. So we can categorize the loans that we have, in my view, in three categories. The category of national organizations. These include World Bank, International Development Agency, African Development Bank, East African Development Bank. Then the other category is of companies or nations. Companies targeted on nations or nations themselves, such as China, who are lending to Uganda. And then, of course, the other ones being private entities, including commercial banks. So for me, the issue is that borrowing is not bad per se. What is bad in borrowing, number one, is the terms under which you are borrowing. The terms. This is very critical. And also for what? Now, our debt sustainability strategy emphasizes that we ought to consider borrowing for concessional loans. These are low interest loans, but also loans whose maturity period is for such a long time. Those are low risk. As opposed to getting money from countries or multinational organizations whose interest is high, but they take so long. I mean, the repayment period is so short. So borrowing from whoever is not a problem. The problem is the terms. Some of the loans that we are getting have terms that are a little bit oppressive. You gave an example of Zambia, where some of the terms include confiscating or attaching the property for which the loan was secured. So that was one element. The second element is for what? We have had a problem as Uganda in respect to defining clearly what we are borrowing for. And that has been occasioned by lack of a particular department of government until recently that would be charged with a responsibility of project analysis, project appraisal, for the purposes of ensuring that the loan that you want secure is relevant, the amount is appropriate, and also the projections that are attached to that loan are reasonable. And in my view, that is why we have had a scenario where the Auditor General indicates in his reports time and again that so much of the loans have been secured, but for a period of 2 years to 3 years, some of these loans have even expired before they are utilized. Yet we have paid commitment fees, we have paid a lot of interest on them. So Ugandans should be wary of strict terms or harsh terms in the loan agreements, but also in the viability of the projects that we are borrowing for this money.
Wow, Patrick, thank you. But there's something here that to pick it up from there, and I think I'm going to first stay with you on this one. When you look at our debt, our external debt, which is about 67% of the total debt, you realize that the amount of money we're supposed to pay back and our budget projections, if we had financed or to service these debts, we will not have any money left to finance the budget. When you look at the debt ratio and the budget allocations and the budget projections, we don't have so much left to finance our budget. So what does this mean? If to an ordinary Ugandan, what does this mean if you have a debt to pay and the amount you have is not even enough to run the country?
Yes, what it means that we are entering into, sooner than later, we are entering into a debt trap. In fact, it is not necessarily true that the money that we mobilize for resources is not enough to pay the debt. In fact, what we are doing is that we are entering into a phase where we are even borrowing to pay the debt. I'll give you an example. In the next financial year coming, the budget is projected at 45 trillion. The amount spent under various programs of government amounts to 29 trillion. Right? Meaning that we shall borrow to finance the budget by over 8 trillion because our revenue projections are at 21 trillion. So we need to get the deficit of that being about 7 or 8 trillion to finance the budget alone. Then ultimately, you need again to borrow the rest of other monies for the purposes of not only financing the budget, but also for financing debt repayment, interest payments, as a matter of fact. So, to move to our answer, or the ordinary person, this means that number one, government does not have adequate resources to invest in the people. What do I mean? Where ordinary government has programs, for example, that deliver basic services such as health and education, if we continue in this trend, it will become extremely difficult for government to invest very efficiently in health and in education. And that will negatively affect this other person, Muntu Awansi, who is expecting quality health services from a health center or education, better education services from a primary school and secondary school. The other element is that if government cannot generate enough resources for running its operations and is relying heavily on debt, it means that, like Christine had said, when the options of borrowing money from abroad are exhausted or have become less forthcoming, the focus is going to be in borrowing internally. And when the government borrows internally, it means that private individuals, will start competing with commercial banks. Now, how will that happen? Under normal circumstances, government borrows money from the private sector through commercial banks. And the commercial banks are happy to trade with government on that basis because government is not a risky borrower. But that therefore means that it reduces the amount of money that is available for commercial banks to onward lend to private sector. Or if they do, then the interest rate shall only rise, and rise. So Muntu Awansi, again, if we continue borrowing at this rate, we'll find it extremely difficult as we go along to borrow money from the commercial bank because the interest rate will be going up because of the competition that will have been created by government. But also, secondly, if government does not have adequate resources to invest in productive sectors such as social services, agriculture, it would therefore mean that the jobs that would have been needed to be created will not be there. And because that will not be there, it means that unemployment shall only continue to rise. And of course, where the economy is not performing, businesses are not starting, all businesses are collapsing, it means people cannot get jobs. Because they cannot get jobs, they cannot get employment, rather they cannot get income, and they cannot be able to meaningfully participate in the market, simply to purchase a few goods and services to run their life. So it also therefore means that the more the country gets indebted, the more it becomes constrained to look after its population, and the more its population ends up into abject poverty. Like Christine had said, we said at the beginning of the show, that the reason as to why we had debt relief, total debt relief, was because the world had come to realization that if these obligations persisted, it would be extremely difficult for governments to implement programs that will get people out of poverty. So the rise in poverty was the number one consideration for debt relief. So now if we are sliding back, it means that the gains that we have so far registered in addressing poverty will be undermined, and the Muntu Awansi would expect then for the situation not to improve, but actually to decline if we do not tame our debt appetite.
Okay. Still carrying the conversation from that direction. And in about 3 minutes, we'll be going in a short break. But before we go for a short break, I'm coming to you, Christine, on this one. Because for me, I'm still disturbed. First of all, in the Auditor General's report, again, I will quote it. He talks about unspent, or there's under-absorption of funds. So at one point, you are borrowing to finance a budget deficit. But when you look at the Auditor General's findings, you find that there are some monies that are underspent. Okay, in actual sense, it's not even spent. But you're borrowing, arguing that the money you have is not enough. And then when we come to also the same report, it again talks about the under-absorption of loans. There are those loans whereby we've not necessarily we've borrowed, but we've not properly absorbed the money we've borrowed. So I'm trying to understand. I'm marrying the two. On one hand, you argue you don't have enough resources. On the other hand, the report is faulting you for, one, under-absorbing loans, and also under-absorbing the budget allocations that have been provided for. So does this speak to incompetence? Does this speak to theft? And when you answer that, put it in context of Tanzania again. I'm sorry, I'm going to point to Magufuli over and over, because for me, I think he proved something that many people, the naysayers who believed in the foreign support, I think are now rethinking the ideology. Because when you look at Magufuli, all that he did, the majority of it, came from how he was frugal in managing the resources that they had. So what does this mean to an ordinary person like me?
Thank you, Felix. And one, I have not been part of the people, or I do not agree with most of the people that say we do not have enough resources as a country to address our development needs or aspirations. Because like you clearly noted, you have under-absorption, you have wastage, in other words, the corruption. You have, for this coming budget, the 2021-22, we also the 481 billion for recapitalizing the Bank of Uganda that had bounced back, and yet the Bank of Uganda was not aware because they received the money last year, and now it comes back, and apparently the Ministry of Finance is saying, yeah, it's not yet approved anyway. So all this is about the management of the resources that we have. And the solution really is not in borrowing, because for as long as you keep borrowing and putting in a pot, maybe if you borrow and put in a pot that has a leakage, you will never be able to fill that pot. And I think that is where Tanzania, to be more specific, that's where Magufuli, may his soul rest in peace, got it right. You have to first address the corruption, the mismanagement, or the poor management, the lack of planning, the lack of absorption of the resources, before you even say that you do not have enough resources. Because we have money, the loans that are there sleeping, and sometimes the project time comes to an end, and yet the money is still there. It is not yet spent. One, because maybe the project affected persons have not been compensated yet, or many other anomalies in the planning. We do not plan before we get the resources. We just borrow, and then we begin planning backwards, and that has taken us far. But also maybe to add that why have we come to this? That is because one, like I said, we have moved more towards the non-concessional borrowing, and which wouldn't be bad, but it is a trap, because one, it allows you to fund your development aspiration, to fund the big infrastructure projects, because the funds are usually big, they're usually large sums of money compared to the concessional. But the danger is, again, that the interest, like Patrick had mentioned, is higher. The grant element is very minimal, and they expire in a short time. Their time frames are really usually short, among other things. So if you borrow such monies, and usually these are commercial lenders, like you had said, China and the private banks, so they are not willing to make any losses, right? You will not expect to now have another HIPIC or MDRI, because these are after money. They are making money, so they will not forgive you, unfortunately. So if you go this line of borrowing, that means you have to be frugal. You have to make sure you invest and reap what you're going to do to pay back, but also, fund your development. So that is where we have found ourselves in a trap, because we keep borrowing, and we are not strict on the misuse of these funds when we borrow them. And that is one of the reasons why we have reached where we are. And just to confirm that even the Ministry of Finance now acknowledges that we have moved from low debt distress to moderate. That means we are moving towards failing to pay back our debt, or getting into a debt trap. but also at the international level, we see some of these credit rating agencies giving us a bad credit rating, like you quoted the Auditor General's report. Fitch, which is one of the credit rating agencies, now gave us negative from positive in June 2020. Our credit rating was revised from stable to negative. And all this means that it is getting more and more risky for these lenders, the external lenders, to lend to Uganda. So that has really brought us to where we are, the increasing debt, and that is why we have to run to the domestic market. And yeah, we are really caught up in a trap, because even our economy seems to be growing downwards. We see it is from 6% in 2019 to 3%, and now as at December, we saw it was 2.9%. So all these external lenders are watching, and so just like we said, is government mortgaging our properties? Definitely that will have to be, because if I'm an external lender and government comes to me with this level of risk, one, I will make my interest expensive. I will have to move the insurance costs on this loan higher, yes, to discourage this person from borrowing. But if they are able to borrow, then it will be very, very expensive, and that is what is happening with us.
Wow.
So if we've got to borrow externally, which is most likely because we don't have resources to fund the budget, it's going to be very expensive. So we expect to see the debt rise even higher, and yet the economy is not growing commensurate.
Okay, thank you, Christine. We are going for a short break, but when we come back, we are going to discuss this whole thing about supplementary funding. Why? Because there are also issues around there, and I think we shall marry this with the timing of supplementary funding in line with when we were heading towards the 2021 elections, whether it had any indication on how our elections were financed in that matter. We shall also discuss issues concerning how we negotiate our loans, because again, the report points to how we seem to be giving away our immunity, the waiver we have for our immunity as a country, the way we negotiate. And I think Ugandans must be very interested to know, what does this mean when you have a poorly negotiated loan? We will also discuss the whole issues of there's what we call what usually Parliament approves a certain threshold of what we can borrow, but it's very clear when you look at the report that with what was approved and what was actually borrowed is way above. Was this coincidental? We are going to have a discussion in that direction. So let's take a short break, then we'll be back in about a minute.
The monster of money politics is eating up Uganda's democracy. When you take money from a candidate, it means you are feeding the monster. Then you become a part of the problem. When a candidate who overspends on campaigns is elected, he or she will not represent voters but himself. He or she will engage in corruption to recover campaign money. Social services will not be delivered and the voter will suffer more. Voter, let's be wise. Give democracy a chance. Do not sell your vote. Focus on the issue.
Welcome back. We are still discussing and analyzing Uganda's economy in the aftermath of 2021 elections. And in the studio, I have A lady and a gentleman, they are both lawyers, but also with a wealth of experience in analyzing our economy. We have Patrick Katabazi. I introduced him much earlier. He's the Executive Director for Center for Budget and Tax Policy. And I also have Christine Byiringiro, who is the Program Manager for Policy Analysis and Governance with Uganda Debt Network. This is the second part of our show, and before we took a break, I hinted on something that I feel we should discuss, again, in context of helping the common person understand. Patrick, let me come to you, because we've had this discussion earlier, and I think it's better that I start with you. The issue of supplementary budgets. Is it a sign of poorly planning? Why is it that it has become a norm to always have supplementary budgets, but more so in an election year, we have supplementary budgets that are quite having substantial amounts of money? Are there expenditures hidden in those supplementary budgets anticipated probably to go into financing partisan politics, for that matter? Because in 2020, Parliament did approve supplementary budget. Of course, at that point in time, there were all arguments to do with addressing the issues to do with COVID. But that amount was quite high. What do you read into this, and what does this mean?
First of all, technically speaking, supplementary budgeting is ideal to address emergencies that happen at budget execution stage. What is very challenging in Uganda's circumstances, and what has remained a very big challenge, is that our supplementary budgeting is not that type of budgeting that is envisaged. It's basically a symptom of a poor planning rather than an action to address something that wasn't envisaged at the beginning of the budget process or to deal with an emergency. Under the Public Finance Management Act of 2015, a solution had been found. And the solution had been found to the effect that for a supplementary budget to be raised, it has to be tagged to the contingency fund. So meaning that the country will put aside some money at the start of the financial year. And if a requirement for a supplementary budget would be met, then what money would be defrayed in the contingency fund. But before that law, 2015 was a year before elections, before that law could be implemented, just within a period of 6 months, government had then rushed to Parliament, called an amendment to remove that qualification. In essence, that safeguard that had been put in place was removed, and then the previous process of raising a supplementary every now and then NHT needed money resumed. So it follows the case, therefore, that supplementary budgeting, the way it is used in Uganda, is usually to address, in some cases, non-priority things. And that's why you notice that there are numerous reports that indicate that a year to the election period, or the year of the election, a lot of supplementary budgets appear in Parliament, allocating money, State House, as an example, to some sections of frontline sectors like agriculture, programs for youth and women, some of which may not be properly designed. And one would argue that there is a correlation between politicking and supplementary budgets. And I will not find it very surprising that the supplementary budget that was raised for COVID in respect to Ministry of Health has had challenges with its accountability, as noted by the Auditor General's report. And of course, in some cases, we are unable to tell whether money has been utilized very well because substantial figures in some of these supplementary budgets are put under classified budget. So, for example, in the half year for 2021, State House alone spent 451 billion as supplementary or non-wage budget category. This was over and above what was initially planned for non-wage. So basically, non-wage is to cater for welfare, transport, allowances, things to facilitate work to move. This increment that was occasioned by this supplementary budget would put that category to have a budgetary increase of 151% at half year. Before we finish the half year, we've already received an increment in non-wage of 151%. That cannot be a sign of a government that is planning properly. That cannot be a sign of a government that is spending resources very well. For me to believe that a supplementary allocation is effective, it must be addressing small adjustments and misadjustments in the budget. Small things, small deviations. We planned for 50, for example, we planned for allowances or facilitation for 50 staff, but we have not taken into account at that time that by the end of the year that we would have finished recruitment process, and now there are 60, so we need to facilitate 10 additional staff. Here we are talking about, in some cases, a supplementary budget doubling the budget itself. So my opinion on this matter is that we have fundamentally abused the principle of supplementary budgeting. We have then transformed what ordinarily would be supplementary budgeting into budgeting within the budgeting process. You do budgeting haphazardly, meaning that any time I can add, recorrect, reallocate during the supplementary budget. So it becomes a cash budgeting process where you're budgeting within a budgeting process. And that is potentially dangerous because it distorts implementation of government programs. Because in some cases you might have noticed that some tax budgets have had to be cut in order to mobilize money to deal with some of the things that are identified in supplementary budgets. So that's not proper planning. I think we need to start planning properly. We need to start thinking again of another round of legal reforms to ensure that we have safeguards in place geared at limiting casual application of supplementary requests in our budgeting process.
Wow. Patrick, you really put it very well, because in October, the 3.8 trillion which was approved by Parliament, and again under the cover of COVID response, you will see that most of the money went to health, went to Ministry of Agriculture, went to projects like Emyoga. But remember, October, we were now almost close to elections. The election day. So that is the electioneering period. So I think there's a very close relationship between supplementary budgeting and politicking. But I'll come back to that. But let me first come to Christine. And I'm slightly taking another tangent of questioning, because I'm now back on the issues to do with the loans. The issue of concern here is how the way we negotiate our loans as a state, because the Auditor General has pointed out that I think we seem to be giving out the immunity Uganda has when we are negotiating these loans seems to be at risk. Help the common person to understand, if you have a poorly negotiated loan portfolio, what am I going to lose and why would I interest myself?
Yes. Thank you, Felix. And maybe just in a second, I want to complement what Patrick had earlier said on the supplementary loans. One that definitely our supplementary budgeting is not focusing on the tenets of supplementary budget because they are not unforeseen, they are not unavoidable. And maybe just to say that for this financial year, 2020-21, while the Ministry of Finance had projected to borrow domestically 3 trillion, to finance the budget, they ended up borrowing up to 6.8 trillion. You see,
Wow.
that is more than half of what you have projected to borrow. That is definitely not proper planning. That is alarming. Yes, we appreciate we had the COVID pandemic, but we also had the elections coming in. And of course, we know there's definitely a connection between the political season and then the spending. Then on how do we negotiate the loans? True, government has the obligation, it's actually a constitutional obligation to protect and preserve public property of Uganda. But increasingly, the Auditor General has noted that as we negotiate our loans, especially the external loans, we see
Christine, I'm losing you. I think it's a network problem. I'm losing Christine a bit. Christine, are you there? Okay, I think there's a network problem with Christine, but Patrick, can you jump in here the whole issue of negotiating loans? Because there's a red flag raised. We seem to be giving away our immunity, our assets and property within Uganda and outside Uganda probably might end up being attached. Oh, Christine is back.
Yes,
okay.
Sorry about that. So we increasingly see we are waiving immunity, and one of the reasons is because we urgently or desperately need this credit. Yes, we urgently and desperately need this debt, but our credit worthiness is questionable to the lenders. So they also have to tighten some of these, like loopholes or gaps, because they do not want to lose out. Most of them, like we saw, they are commercial, the type of loans that we want to fund our infrastructure. We need these big loans and they are expensive. So this is where we see the catch-22. Why do we have to go and waive our immunity? And increasing, it's going to happen. And if we do that, trust me, we are losing our properties from within. The other day we thought Uganda Airlines belonged to Uganda until we had in Parliament that we actually do not know who the individual, meaning it's owned by an individual, the whole airline, the name, and we don't know. So that is what is happening in Uganda. And unfortunately, our negotiation of loans is becoming more compromised. One, because of our position. You know, when you're not a good data, you do not have the ability to get up and speak confidently. That is one. But also because of this, we see the conditionalities, including that have been put upon us, especially by these lenders, the Chinese, who want to, instead of credit, they actually do the infrastructure development for you. It will be a loan, but in kind. They will bring their infrastructure, their vehicles, their labor, and that hurts us. That hurts our economy because we are not reaping anything. They are repatriating all the profits and everything. Our labor force is not gaining in any way. And so we see ourselves losing out almost completely because of our position that is not good as we go to negotiate these loans. But also we see some of these donor modalities. The donor will sometimes force, if I should use that word, force or coerce you into getting a loan, even when it is not in your interest, even when it is not one of your priorities, but somehow you'll see that they'll acquire a loan and government will acquire a loan, and you will wonder who and why would they have acquired such a loan. But at the back of it, they are probably beneficiaries who are there, maybe the donors and some of the few public officials who have negotiated this loan on behalf of the country. So we also have to get back to the table and know these public officials who are negotiating these loans for us. We have to put them to account and even put sanctions sometimes, because why would you negotiate a loan that is not in the best interest of the country? And then we are the people, the citizens, are the ones that are going to pay back this loan. Of course, we talked about the non-performance and etc., all those issues of management and implementation. Yeah, so we want to see the public officials that are negotiating these loans on behalf of government. Do they have the capacity? Because you have to have that training in loan negotiation. Do they have the best interest of Ugandans at heart? And if they omit some of these, like requirements and etc., do we see them being held personally liable, or do they get away with these mistakes and we continue to see poor loan contraction and poor negotiation of some of these loans for Uganda, which has increasingly now not benefited us, because ultimately our economy will not grow. So yeah, that is basically what I would want to add on that.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, I'm bringing you here on this one. Are we so desperate to the extent that we must take on loans with very stringent and very unpleasant terms, but also is borrowing for infrastructure development really justifiable, having seen what Magufuli did? And lastly, as you wrap it up as well, how do we get out of this rabbit hole we are in?
Yes, so is borrowing necessary in the current circumstances? It is yes and no. Yes, to the extent that you have a budget that you cannot finance. I'll give an example. Next financial year alone, the projected expenditure under programs is 29 trillion. But we shall be able to generate, according to projections, only 21 trillion. Without addressing the issue of debt repayment alone, we need about 7 trillion to run programs of government. So to that extent, one would say that borrowing is necessary. But on the flip side of it is that are these programs that we are borrowing money from, are their budgets constructed properly? Have we taken time to look through the budgets, identify areas of leakages, close them up, and get satisfied that the budgets that we have are at minimum level the kind of budgets that we must have as a country? Because then if we did that, we will agree here that if we did that, perhaps you will find that even the resources that we are targeting to collect would be sufficient. If, for example, we are spending so much money than we actually need to spend, then it means that we will cut down on the budgets and the revenue generation that has actually been showing positive signs of growth would really be sufficient to meet at least a big chunk of the budgetary requirements that we have for different sectors. So in which case then, if we decided to act frugal, if we decided to work within our means, then this level of excessive borrowing would be unnecessary. And the example Magufuli you gave is a clear indication that you can take deliberate steps to look at the resources that you have, allocate and reallocate, but ensure that you deliver your activities, your programs within a given resource envelope. Number two, I think if as a country went back on a drawing board to address the issue of contribution to the national resource envelope. Contributions, I'm talking about a national duty for an adult citizen, a working citizen, to contribute to his or her development. That national consensus, in my view, would be very good in increasing our resource envelope. Why am I saying so? You find that in many cases, people are supposed to be paying taxes and not paying taxes. You find that a small percentage of the population is the one every year in and out is targeted, particularly in direct taxes. Even many people fall outside the tax net. So our domestic resource mobilization strategy must be embraced by all stakeholders to ensure that actually, even if we said that we have a higher budget, we are equally focused on the supply side of resources to ensure that those programs that we so desire are effectively implemented. What can be done? We need to reform our debt management strategy. How we are negotiating loans is very critical that we address it. The team that negotiate and sign those agreements, the issue of technical capacity needs to be equally discussed. In some other countries, they hire the best of the best to be in some of these departments. For example, it is of recent that the government of Uganda instituted a department on project appraisal and public-private partnership. It wasn't there before, but we have been contracting loans, we have been undertaking projects. So if a project has not gone through a thorough appraisal preparation stage, it is not surprising if such a project can actually attract a loan which loan cannot be absorbed because at the implementation stage, there is a mismatch between the project objectives itself and the project implementation strategy. So we need to tighten in the project appraisal stage so that at the end of the day, if we contract to borrow money, that money comes on schedule and it is utilized very well. It adds into the production trajectory for which we normally borrow money from. Then the last question again is that we need to be modest in our aspirations. Having 1,000 kilometers of the road that is not going to make 3 years is not helpful, because after 3 years, you are going back into repair. And remember, by the way, because you have limited amount of money for delivery of services, most of the money for infrastructure projects is being borrowed. But we are borrowing to put in place infrastructure. We haven't borrowed to now start repairing. It therefore means that if we have at all, we have limited budget for repair. So if we want to concentrate on having a road of 100 kilometers that is not going to be first class, that is going to have to need repairs within 3 years, and you don't have a budget for repair, that is an investment that has gone to waste. The rate of return on that investment is almost zero. Because by the time people start, see how long it takes to have a road. You are going to have 4 years having that road of 100 kilometers. But before you even enjoy it, before they finish the last phase, you already started repairs in another phase. So that means that if you do repair, maybe you also borrow to repair, or you're losing money that otherwise you would go for something else. So what am I saying? If we say we are borrowing for physical infrastructure, can we do it so that we are borrowing the correct amount for the correct assignment, and it is long term, it is quality, that corruption won't be part of the equation, that inefficiencies are going to be eliminated, that value for money is a key principle, and that the procurement process is not only transparent, but we are going for the best of the best. So that at the end of the day, even if you are to commit Ugandans that this loan is going to be for 32 years, let people who will be alive in 32 years' time to say, yes, this was worth it. We borrowed this money, we have sacrificed for it, but we have also made so much out of it. It has enhanced productivity. It has addressed asymmetries. I can now go to Karamoja and buy goods or sell goods there. But if you have to have a road whose construction is going to take 4 years to complete, and then you are going to engage for less than 2 years, then you start repair or start dealing with massive potholes, I think that is not going to help us. That area project management approach and implementation needs to reform, and we need as Ugandans to go back on the drawing board, have a conversation like the conversation the Tanzanians have had, and we redefine our priorities. Because if we do not redefine our priorities, then we cannot make any progress, even in resource mobilization. So if we are mobilizing resources to address things which are not of priority, or if there are priorities but wrong priorities, then first of all, borrowing will never stop. The entire generated resources will never be efficient. It fits into the example that Christine said. You're simply aiming at putting a lot of money in a netted basket or in a liquid basket. So even if you target the whole of Lake Victoria to make a basket with holes full, that will never be achieved. So for me, the issue of prioritization, setting, having a national consensus on what our priorities are will be very instrumental in resolving part of the bigger problem that we are dealing with.
Thank you so much, Katabazi. Picking from what you've just said, redefining our priorities, and as we come to the end of the show, I'm coming to you, Christine, and talks about the leaking basket. Indeed, Uganda seems to be having a leaking basket, and almost every hole in the basket, there's someone who is tapping on the leaking water. But now, I have two contrasting questions. One question which I want you to comment on briefly, but the other one will also allow me to kind of like help us draw how we get out of the situation we are in, but from a different tangent, partly touched it. The first question which I have for you is, we seem not to be having a very clear policy guideline on how we issue and manage and monitor tax exemptions and all those other investor incentives. You find that the criteria that was used to give investor A to qualify for a tax incentive is different from the criteria used for another investor. How and that creates a challenge for potential abuse of whoever is behind providing these incentives. So how
Yes.
do we deal with this? That's one question which I want you to comment on very briefly. But the other bigger question, which is kind of like more or less wrapping up this session, is more about from the perspective, if we look at our situation we are in, whether you call it the economic situation of a catch-22, or a budget or a financial challenges we are having as a country, or our budgeting discipline per se, is it by and large a governance problem? And if so, then how do you deal with this governance problem? Because now I need you to look at it from that angle of a governance expert. Those are my two questions.
Thank you very much. And these 2 or 3 questions seem to have one magic bullet. And that is at the top of it all. I look at the political interference or political involvement. Yeah, the political will, call it that. Really, one, you mentioned the tax exemptions. First of all, we have policies. Yes, we do have policies. Whether we have them or not has seemingly not made a difference, because we seem to see these policies violated intentionally, all in the interest of the political favoritisms and all that. And with the exemptions, like you said, actually the Auditor General report also noted that we have some big companies or investors, one from within, who have been given tax exemptions because of promotion of boo-boo and the environment, the current context. We need to raise the revenue and encourage import substitution, which is good. But at the same time, we seem to see a clawback where we have also waived taxes from some investors who are now importing. We have waived taxes on imports, and yet we are waiving taxes on these companies which are producing from within. So that is quite confusing. It is not clear, and clearly it does not follow any policy. It violates all the policies that would be in place, and we need to streamline. We need to come to the drawing board and say, if the policy says this, if we want to promote boo-boo and import substitution, then we must tax all imports and favor what is produced from within. But we cannot say that we shall tax some of them and then we leave some of them just because they are investors and they are bringing in the raw materials and etc., that we shall exempt them. So that is very wrong, and it will not help us achieve or save any of the funds. But also you talked about prioritizing. Yes, maybe this debt problem, the increasing debt, could be well, let's look at the positive side. I am hoping that it will help us get back to the drawing board, that it will help us do some soul searching and evaluate and see, are there areas where we can do a saving as a country and prioritize against some other areas. For instance, tax exemptions. Do we really need to exempt all those that are exempted? Do we need the cities that we have created? Do we need to fund them? Do we need the current number of MPs in the House? Is there anything that we can do about it? The leakages, is there where we can try to, tighten up on the controls to avoid leakages of resources? And then is there where we can be strong and fight impunity? Because that is the biggest challenge. We have seen public officials and companies and different individuals that have invoked the political head's name to get away with it. And usually there are so much big funds involved. And we see people getting away with it time and time again. And this is where Tanzania has won the battle and has managed to attain middle income in such a short time. Yeah. And so we need to see more punitive action. We need to see adherence to the laws, strict adherence. And yeah, I think we can generate the resources that we need. We have the resources that we probably need. Why don't we start there? Why don't we start on closing these gaps, the leakages, see how much saving we can do if we prioritize, and then we sit on the table and see how much have we saved through proper planning. Is everyone who is responsible, have they been held to account? Have we made sure we crack the whip on each and every one? If we are strict, and that is, I think that was what Magufuli used, it can be a magic bullet. There's something you asked that I have missed out.
My other question was about whether it's a you partly touched whether it's a governance problem and whether it's we address it from the problem from the angle perspective of addressing the governance gaps, and I think you've actually touched it. Yes. Yeah. So now, Patrick, in about a minute or two, and also I'll give you a minute or two as you wrap up. The parting question is about the NSSF amendment bill. We are now having a ping pong about it. Parliament passes it with that famous clause. Every pensioner who is serving with NSSF is dying to see to access the midterm access of NSSF pension money. And then the Ministry of Finance advises otherwise. And as the president, as it is before the president, it has an opinion on it that somehow we will see it being thrown back to Parliament. What is your take on this NSSF ping pong bill? I'll call it a ping pong bill because now we have the Ministry of Finance has a different idea about it. Parliament has a different idea about it. And even we pensioners, we as stakeholders have a different idea about it. What is your take in 1 minute? And also your parting shot, Patrick. I'll also come to you, Christine, your take and also a parting shot as we wrap up this session.
So first of all, my opinion on the NSSF public and my position has been very consistent from the word go. I will hate to disappoint quite a number of people that my position seems to be the same position that the government generally has on the question of NSSF. And my position relates to the contentious clause in the NSSF bill about midterm access. Midterm access, wherever it has been implemented, particularly Ghana, and what I should impress upon Ugandans is that it is tagged to voluntary payments. Now, once you put in place a law, and the overall objective is to address risks and vulnerabilities that come with old age, it is only prudent that the spirit of the law keeps alive. So the narrative that I am young and energetic, I need my benefits now so that I can invest is horribly wrong. Because if NSSF is simply 5% of your gross income and you retain the 95%, and you're not doing something tangible with it, it becomes impossible to say that the 5% is relevant for your productive life to turn things around. When you find yourself struggling at a young age, it actually really means that in old age things will be extremely tough. So in circumstances where our life expectancy is only growing, it would be prudent that the discussion that we should be having in this country would be about, in fact, waiving the qualifying age. Because therefore it means that if you access your money, a high proportion of the money that is coming to your benefit now, you become vulnerable, more vulnerable in the future, because at 60 years or more, you will have entered a less productive stage. You are not employable, you are not bankable, you are not insurable, but even the little income that you will be getting through your pension fund You have eaten it already. And that's why I vehemently oppose any intervention that will cut short the qualifying age. To suggest, in my view, that people should get 20% standing to their benefit is wrong. But it's also based on a wrong debate. The wrong debate is something that people think that the money that we compulsorily send to NSSF is a saving. It is technically not. We save with commercial banks, but we contribute to NSSF to get entitled to a benefit. The reason for why we are contributing to NSSF is to be entitled to a benefit when we qualify. It is not that we are saving for an interest, because in any case you might have heard that NSSF has capacity. All the law gives them room, including some of the proposals that we made, to invest in health insurance, in housing, in education. So you're investing, you're making a contribution, your employer is contributing, so that when you qualify, you get entitled to a benefit. It is only just that in our circumstances, that benefit has been money. But the benefits could be much more. And lastly, if you have a properly functioning entity like NSSF, and you seek to withdraw without notice more than 2 trillion, what implications does it have on the assets of the organization? Won't you impair its investment capacity? And when you do so, what happens when you may not want to 20% who think like me? So this debate is not only for those who want money now, but it should be for all of us. For you who want money now, in my view, if that is implemented, it affects what is coming to my benefit at the end of the day, because the payment of about 2 trillion will erode the investment abilities of NSSF, and that has potential to affect the interest rate that should be coming to my benefit at the end of every fiscal year for NSSF. And that's why for me, I think, as opposed to running this campaign on emotions, let us look at the technical aspects of it. Let us review the whole question of social protection and social security, and then be able to come up with a meaningful solution. If you want NSSF to transform into a pension scheme, so be it, it's good, because you need some sustainable flow of income when you are old. But remember, you're not working, so where are you going to be getting money from? It is then how these pension programs come into effect. This has been a very good discussion. The issue of debt is very important. NSSF plays a very big role, because in any case, by the way, NSSF, because of keeping long-term funds, has the capacity to engage into long-term lending. When you have very many players engaging into long-term lending, the interest rate in the market goes down. So, but now, if you now make NSSF a short-term thing, it means all actually goes down. So this is what that we should have. The debate on the debt sustainability is very important. The debate on designing priorities for this country, making that the model in my view is very appropriate, and we should have had it yesterday, but it's not too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There you have it. Very interesting perspectives. Over to you, Christine. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you very much. And definitely, I completely agree with Patrick. You know, Ugandans, I do not know about other people, but with Ugandans, should I call it a saving culture? You know, I don't know if it is a human being thing or a Ugandan thing. When you know you have some money anywhere, whether it is saved and you know you can access it, you always want to access it when you get the smallest problem. Sometimes it's not even a problem, but you're there and you just feel like spending, and you just say, oh, I have my money there, and then you want to go and use it. even when you might not need it, but just because you want it. So I'll just use that analogy because we are always impatient, even if just a percentage of it, and yet it will be beneficial later. Much later, it will be much more beneficial. So it's always important to be patient because you definitely need it much more later. But with that, my position has always been the same as Patrick. And without wasting much time, with Uganda, I'll repeat this about the public debt and etc. Debt is not bad, borrowing is not bad, but it is how we manage the borrowed resources. And the single magic bullet to turning around our situation, the corruption and etc., is right at the heart of the politics. If we have political will, the good political leadership, then I think we are able to achieve all. If we make sure that we implement the laws we do have, but if they're able to catch each and everyone without segregation, without discrimination, then I think we are able to forward our development agenda. Yeah.
Wow, there you are. And that is why ACFIM, we believe that money in politics is very important to address so that doesn't become toxic, to influence the way we do our politics, influence the kind of leaders we have, so that we can also have a Magufuli type of regime that critically addresses issues that are at the heart of the citizens. It has been a very interesting discussion. I think you'll agree with me. For the first time, I've shot my time by almost over 30 minutes just because of the discussions we've been having. Allow me to end it here. I've been with two very knowledgeable individuals, Patrick Katabazi, who is the Executive Director, Center for Budget and Tax Policy, with a lot of experience in this area. I've also been with Byiringiro, who works with the Uganda Debt Network as Policy Analysis and Governance Program Manager, and also with a lot of experience. Both of them are lawyers, but with a lot of insights into how economics plays out. And I myself, the usual host, has been Felix Kafuma from ACFIM, Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. Allow me to call it a day for now. We will be with you again next week on Good Friday, and I look forward to having another very interesting conversation. God bless. Bye-bye.
Uganda's democratization process suffers from highly commercialized politics. Too much money circulates in Uganda's election, and it's mind-blowing where it comes from. Uganda's economic experience a dip in gross domestic product, GDP, every time a general election is concluded. One way of curbing this is through campaign finance legislation. And this is what ACFIM has been advocating since 2015. This advocacy intensified in 2019.
ACFIM has been able to engage the different caucuses of parliament so that they can appreciate that there is a bigger problem when it comes to money in politics. And also appreciate that the only easy way of addressing that problem is through a legislation. ACFIM has engaged MPs, but also mobilizing them to support the campaign finance law.
On February 26th and 27th, debate on campaign finance legislation finally reached the floor of Parliament following 5 years of sustained advocacy.
We have seen the economy really being affected by a lot of money flowing, chasing little, and causing inflation. And this is something which we felt that it is extremely important to really regulate, come up with a law to limit this big expenditure of money that really affects and hurts our economy. someone would pour 2 billion in an election. Imagine for a member of parliament slot.
Campaign financing you are raising, if we really become serious, it will be done. But there will be colleagues say we don't need it, but until it hits them, that will not. So for me, I would suggest, Madam Speaker, that my colleague there be allowed to bring that campaign financing bill to attach something in the electoral process other than waiting, because it's an opportunity for it.
After 2 days of heated debate, legislators confirmed with the recommendation of the Legal and Parliamentary Committee that Uganda needs not provisions scattered in different electoral laws, but a standalone law on campaign financing. This is a reinforcement of ACFIM's position on the same.
This being a new area of the law within our legislative advocacy efforts, many members of parliament felt that regulation of political finance would be a move to kick themselves out of parliament, because you realize that most of them do come to parliament as a result of excessive expenditures during elections.
When we heard that the Committee on Legal was coming to Byiringiro, we took it as a golden opportunity to massively mobilize local people. We're interested in making sure that we emphasize the need to legislate on campaign financing, specifically for the committee to appreciate the need to create a cap on how much and how the money that is invested in campaigns is tracked.
If campaign finance disclosure provisions had gotten integrated into the national electoral laws, it would have created a higher level of transparency and accountability.
If those campaign finance provisions had been embedded in the electoral laws of Uganda, it would have gone a long way in changing the electoral playing field, because then we would have for the first time gotten provisions to regulate and level the playing field for elections. It would have helped women and youth who have not had the access to be able to compete with the men who have gained a lot of access in social financing. All is not lost, because at least when you look around, the subject of legislating on election campaign financing has gained traction, not only within Parliament, but also within the political parties and the citizenry, but also the media.
Since 2015, ACFIM has been advocating for the enactment of campaign finance law that regulates money in politics and electoral processes. ACFIM will not relent until Uganda has legislation to shield electoral processes from the toxic effect from unregulated money. Partner with us. Help support ACFIM's mission of contributing towards building electoral integrity by promoting transparency and accountability in financing of political processes through research, civic engagement, monitoring and advocating for reforms. Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate. Together, we can contribute towards enhancing democracy as a viable system of governance in Uganda. Contact us at acfim@politicalfinanceafrica.org or acfimuganda@gmail.com or www.politicalfinanceafrica.org. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube.